Dr. Humphreys, and let me just state for the record, I think they canceled the UT football practice to do that
They
demonstration.
moved football practice, which was the biggest miracle of all in my students' eyes.
Which is a big deal in Texas. But
Right.
let me just follow up on your last comment, because I think that's probably the most, but first of all, this is astounding that you could hijack a UAV and bring it down. And I think it's an eye-opener. And let me also state that military UAVs are encrypted. This could not be done to you. A military UAV, such as the ones used on the border, but any ones used domestically, I think have this vulnerability that we're very concerned about. And I'll ask you about that later. But you mentioned that you talked to the FAA, and their main concern is security of the airways.
Safety of the airways.
Safety of the airways in terms of, you know, they'll designate a flight pattern and they'll want to make sure that there are no other either airplanes or UAVs that would interfere with that flight pattern. Mm-hmm. But their focus is not security.
That's right.
So there's no federal agency that is providing oversight in terms of that security aspect today. Is that correct?
As far as I know, and I believe that the DHS has a role to play in that, and that the FAA could possibly play a role there too. But as I say, its culture and its expertise are not designed for that.
Well, I think the Government Accountability Office agreed with you. In their report, they said that this is the role when they directed the Secretary of Homeland Security to the TSA to basically provide for that security, assess the security risks within the country domestically, and develop a national policy. So I think you have some company there in terms of agreement. I find this to be you know, a bit of a no one's minding the store type scenario. No federal agencies willing to step up to the plate. And when you got the GAO saying that DHS needs to do it, I tend to agree with them that DHS should be stepping up to the plate, and yet they failed to even bring witnesses to testify here today on this very, very important issue when you had a terror plot just thwarted in the United, you know, right at the United States Capitol less than a year ago using one of these UAVs. Getting back to well, let me ask you this. In terms of, you've identified a real vulnerability with these domestic UAVs. Tell me what would be sort of your kind of nightmare scenario in demonstrating what you were able to do with the UAVs if a terrorist or some other malicious person wanted to exploit the system.
Okay, well, I should point out that currently I'm not terribly worried about this. The UAV that we brought down was only about 13 pounds, not very large. It could do some damage to you if it fell on you and the helicopter blades swing swiftly. But I'm not terribly worried at present. What my nightmare scenario would be is looking forward 3 or 4 years where we have now adopted the UAVs into the national airspace without addressing this problem. And now the problem is scaling up so that we've got more heavy UAVs, more capable UAVs, and yet this particular vulnerability isn't addressed. So that would be my nightmare scenario. We don't fix it and it becomes even more an indigenous problem in the UAV navigation systems.
And in fact, I think in the next 2 years, it's predicted we'll have thousands of these things flying around domestically. Does that give you concern, given the fact that there's no federal agency really addressing the security aspects?
The FAA did make a prediction that by 2020 there could be 30,000 of these flying our airspace. It does concern me. I would like someone to take ownership of the security component of UAVs coming to the national airspace. And
getting back to, I mean, you've done, I think, the country a great service by identifying a vulnerability. You know, we talk a lot about cybersecurity. If you're connected to the internet, you're vulnerable. What you've identified is if you're connected to a GPS device, you're vulnerable. Can you explain to us basically how that works in the limited amount of time I have left and how we can fix that?
Yeah, sure. Well, you're right. This is a bigger problem than UAVs. This is just one expression of the larger problem of unauthenticated civilian GPS signals. The civilian GPS signals have been so popular, so useful, that over the last 2 decades we've absorbed the technology deeply into our critical national infrastructure. So it is that even manned aircraft have some vulnerability to spoofing. Financial exchanges and the energy distribution system are increasingly reliant on GPS for timing. So in fact, this is this is a larger problem than the UAV, and it all gets traced back to the unauthenticated civilian GPS signals.
I see my time is about ready to expire, but let me just say thank you for coming up to Washington to testify here today. Thank you for what I believe is a great service to the country. Thanks for identifying a vulnerability, not only technology-wise, but also from a bureaucratic standpoint. And I intend for this committee to fix this problem. With that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Q A.